Hello, I'm Eric Mosley, CEO of Workhuman, and welcome to the final episode of our Workhuman Spotlight Future of Work series. I'm here in London's Hyde Park, the Rose Garden, right across the street from where Workhuman Live Forum just wrapped up. It's a one-day event that brings together HR leaders, business executives and industry experts to explore the latest trends, best practices in creating human-centred workplaces. On today's episode, we'll be examining one of the most crucial drivers of employee engagement and business success. But more importantly, it's also a concept that encompasses some of the most fundamental needs we have as humans, and that is total well-being. If you're new to the term, total well-being goes beyond the traditional view that only looks at someone's physical health. It takes a holistic approach that can include an employee's emotional, social, financial and career well-being, and touches upon everything from their compensation and growth potential to their sense of purpose and belonging in the workplace. And this approach to well-being is more important than ever. If you've tuned into previous episodes, you know that employee engagement, normally associated with energy and performance in the workplace, is still trending down to historic lows. And research by Deloitte found that 77% of workers have experienced burnout at their current job. So the question is, if our well-being in the workplace is so important to our success in and out of work, how do we prioritise and grow it? Traditionally, workplaces' approach to doing so has been hindered by ideas like work-life separation, that your home life and who you are outside of work stays outside of work and vice versa. In today's world generally, we know better. We know the importance of psychological safety and bringing your whole self to work. We know that work and life aren't separate factors in our lives, but two intertwined forces that improve each other when they're balanced and in harmony. By any metric, the way we live today is incredibly different from just a few generations ago. For many of us in our day-to-day lives, the most important intrinsic relationships, which are proven to be fundamental to happiness, are with the people we work with, our co-workers. What's more, for many of us, a major part of our identity comes from our work, our sense of purpose, of belonging, to something greater than ourselves. In short, work has a profound ability to provide a sense of belonging and meaning, improving not just the quality of our work, but the quality of our lives. It's an idea that's so profound we pioneered an entire industry around it, creating an employee recognition platform that for 25 years has helped people at some of the world's largest companies connect with their sense of purpose, to feel more energized and engaged, just by celebrating their successes with one of the most powerful forces in our lives as human beings, each other. I'll see you again at the end of the show and with a few next steps you can take. But for now, thanks for joining us and let's start the show.
I'd like the panel to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, Sarah. Could you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them what you do?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Whitman. I am the Senior Vice President of our global e-commerce function here at Workhuman. And so really the goal of my team is to bring meaningful, memorable experiences to employees around all the things that they can do with their awards. And the goal is to really bring that level of meaning and memory to everybody who's using our program and getting recognized through it.
Sarah Whitman, thank you very much. I'm also going to indulge by calling her Sarah W, because we have another Sarah who's going to introduce herself later. But next, Max.
Thank you, Peter. I'll start maybe with a couple of questions that might be on your minds. First of all, Max Hunter is my real name. I'm not a 90s TV show member either. And the other thing is, what does a Chief Joy Officer actually do? So very briefly, I was the Chief Joy Officer, so it was a real job on a real C-suite in a real company. And the vision that we painted for the Chief Joy Officer was to create a place to work where people wake up on a Monday morning and look forward to going back to work to make a difference.
Thank you very much, Max. And Sarah Cunningham.
Thank you. So I'm Sarah Cunningham. I'm the Managing Director of the World Wellbeing Movement. So we're a not-for-profit social impact organisation housed within the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford. Our goal is to improve the quality of life of people across the world by putting well-being at the heart of decision-making, both in business and in public policy. So everything we recommend is grounded in robust, evidence-informed insights. So that's me.
Thank you very much. And we have been talking a little bit before this session, and these are great people to talk to. And I think what it brought home, which you've just mentioned, is that a lot of our commitment in this area is forged in the crucible of our own experiences. I'm sure it's the same for a lot of you who are listening to this today. And let's start our journey with, well, what is well-being? You know, we always assume that we kind of know what it is, but actually I'd like to have a bit of a definition of what it is that we're talking about. I'm going to ask you to lead us in that part of the discussion.
Sure. Yeah, well, well-being from an organizational perspective, as we think about it at Workhuman, is really a comprehensive approach to the creation of a great experience for your employees, including their happiness and their health. We know that when people score higher from a total well-being perspective, that they perform better, they're happier in their jobs, they're more engaged, they're more likely to stay, and you're creating an environment that really is conducive to driving that business growth. And the work that we've done collectively with Gallup has helped us identify 5 core areas of total well-being. So I'll just run through those quickly just to give everybody a definition of exactly what that means. So these 5 areas are physical well-being, which is kind of what you think about in terms of wellness, right? It's your health, it's your ability to function on a day-to-day basis, and it's the ability you have to really bring energy to your jobs and to your life. Then we have financial well-being, and financial well-being is about your economic stability, and it's about whether you have the funds necessary to be able to lead your life and to support yourself and your family. Then we have career well-being, and career well-being is all about, do you like what you do every day? And are you feeling like you have great opportunities for growth and continued development? Then we get into social well-being, and social well-being is about the relationships that you have and whether those are meaningful connections and whether those are bringing you satisfaction in your life, whether you feel safe. And then the last element is community well-being, and that brings us into the world of all of the communities that you have in your life, whether that's at work or outside of work. And do you feel like you have kind of a sense of purpose, a sense of connection to those communities? So organizations, by continuing to invest into and focusing on these 5 core elements, can really create an environment that is not only conducive to employee well-being at an individual level, but helps to create cultures that then correlate to much greater growth and expansion over time.
Okay. Well, very interesting. I mean, I'd be quite curious to see, how did we get here? So I'd really invite the two of you, maybe Max, you'd like to start. How did we get to this very well-elaborated ecosystem of well-being with 5 pillars and lots of stuff behind it?
I come at it from a slightly different angle, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. What is the role of the organization in all of those 5 pillars? Can we really expect the organization to take care of us on all of that stuff? Physical, for example, sure, I want to make sure I've got good chairs, right? So my back's okay, or whatever that looks like. But whether or not I go for a jog twice a week, whether or not I eat healthy food, is that really the role of the organization to take care of that?
It's a question of, is it an obligation versus is it the right thing to do as a business, as an organization that is housing people from all parts of society to contribute to the greater good of society. It's also about smart business decisions, right? Because the evidence that we have indicates that when you actually invest into your people and your leadership and your programs in ways that help to establish well-being across all of those dimensions, that you do see better results from a business perspective.
And Sarah C., I know that you and your organization have done quite a lot of research on this, so how would you see, what is it, this ecosystem of well-being?
So one of the actionable pieces of advice that I always give to business leaders is, if you want to improve employee well-being, measure it. Because well-being is a science. And that's something that I feel is really important. As science is something that can be measured and that can be improved, well-being can be measured and well-being can be improved. In order to measure well-being, the science-based measures that we recommend for businesses are 4 key elements. First of all, measure employees' job satisfaction. That's their evaluative well-being. Then measure their happiness at work and their negative stress at work. That's positive and negative emotion. And then measure their sense of purpose at work. That's what Aristotle would have called eudaimonic well-being. Now, I think what's really important is that's only going to tell you how your employees are feeling. It tells you nothing about why they're feeling that way, but how can you improve if you don't have a baseline to go from?
You know, there's the responsibility of the individual for their own well-being. There's the responsibility of the organization for the well-being of their employees. So where do these things begin and end? And I think we've got a useful foundational definition of what is it, you know, in terms of the pillars that we've been talking about. Is there more that you'd like to add at this section in terms of what is it? Because it's certainly something which has grown a lot over the last few years. You know, it started as, I think it was a Hallmark card, wasn't it? And then it evolved into what looks like a bit of a science.
You know, one thing I will say, can I just ask the audience, hands up if you've come across the World Happiness Report? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of hands going up. So how do we figure out which countries are happier countries? Well, the Gallup World Poll actually asks, in most countries, a representative sample of people, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays? That simple question, we call it subjective well-being. We are best placed to tell you how we're feeling. That simple question, an awful lot of research has shown that that is highly correlating or highly indicative of our physical health, our mental health, and our longevity. But what I want to get away from, because I hear far too often, is, oh, well-being, that's a bit fluffy. Well, actually, it's not, because we've all had good days and we've all had bad days. And if you're suffering, if you're having a bad day, is that fluffy? It's really not. So
why should we do it? And Max, I'd really like you to lead on that one for us, and then we'll all chip in with our views of why should an organization take an interest in this area.
I'd like you all to think about a time in your working life when Monday mornings felt great. It might be yesterday, might not be. But just take a moment to think about a time in your life when Monday mornings felt great. And what were the drivers? When you have that moment in mind, why did those Monday mornings feel great? Once you have that, I'm going to take you to the dark side and think of a time when Monday mornings didn't feel great. In fact, a time when you went to bed on a Sunday night and closed your eyes, you got that feeling of dread in the pit of your stomach. Think about that time in your lives and what it was that drove that. And when you have those things, I'll take you back to the good side now, come. Think how much more productive you were in the first example than the second example, how much more you gave voluntarily, how much more effective you were. And there is now, thankfully, lots of data to prove it, but you almost don't need it now to go, if my people are waking up on a Monday morning and looking forward to going back to work, my business will be more successful. And that's why I asked the provocative question before, is because I think that well-being, if you can create a culture where people wake up on a Monday morning and look forward to going to work to make a difference, I cannot imagine a place where my emotional and psychological well-being is bad. In fact, quite the opposite. And what we spend half our waking lives at work. So of course it has an impact on our overall total well-being and whether I want to go for a jog or whether I want to sit on the sofa watching Netflix and eating crap.
How about the two of you? Should we start with you, Sarah W? Why should organizations do this? What's in it for them?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm interested maybe to share a little bit of a personal experience that I had, which I shared with this group earlier. So I've worked in a lot of different environments, And I was at an old job in a company that was a quite intense environment. And I loved the work that I was doing. And I had just come back from maternity leave. I had about a 9-month-old at home. And a few months after coming back, I started to get these episodes of just being really dizzy all the time. Like I literally couldn't walk around the office, and I had no idea what was going on. So I took a couple of sick days, sat at home, worked from the couch, continued to have these dizzy episodes. I started to see doctors to try to understand what was going on. And their first thought was, oh my gosh, you might have a brain tumor. We need to start looking into all these different factors that could be causing this. And it took probably 5 doctors before somebody actually mentioned mental health. And through this process, I learned that I deal with anxiety, which I know so many people do. And it was illuminating for me trying to learn to progress in my career beyond that point and figure out what is the right environment for me. Certainly, I think there's an element of the obligation of the employer. I think there's an obligation as an individual to kind of understand what drives you and understand what your individual needs are. But what's most important is finding that type of environment that is conducive to how you want to work. And that has been what is so life-changing for me, being in a place where we're surrounded by gratitude, where we encourage people to be their authentic selves and to bring their real selves to work. And I'm able to now be the most authentic version of a leader that I can be. And so this is just one example, and I'm sure everyone in the audience could probably share a similar example, whether it's yourselves or somebody that you've known. And I think this gets down to why it's important and why it's critical, because if that's the way you're feeling in a job, you're not going to stay. And if you do stay, you're not going to be able to give your all. And so it's almost like it's not rocket science, right? Let's treat people the way that we would want to be treated. And let's treat people with compassion and implement different types of programs and ways of working that can support people through all the ups and downs and all of the challenges of life.
We talked a little bit earlier when we were preparing for this about it's okay to share. It's okay to talk about these things. And maybe part of the problem is when we don't feel that we can. And then it becomes a lonely kind of problem that just belongs to us as an individual. And that's not very healthy. So I think there's definitely something to be said for that.
So I'm going to have a bit of empathy for the CFO. A CFO's job is that for every £1 that they invest or that they spend on a program, they want to get at least £2 back. Now, if that's the CFO's job, and I need to convince the CFO to invest in my work well-being programs, well, the good news is there is an awful lot of high-end data that shows that if you can improve employee well-being, and notice that I said if you can improve employee well-being, I didn't say if you can invest in employee well-being, right? You've got to actually improve it, and we'll get to that a bit later. If you can improve employee well-being, you will see improvements in the metrics that matter to CFOs: productivity, talent attraction, talent retention, financial and stock market performance. A colleague of mine, Professor Jan Emmanuel Deneve, and also Dr. George Ward from our academic partner, the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford, conducted a large piece of research in BT call centres. And that field study provides us with the first causal field evidence that a happier employee is, big surprise, more productive. But we now have the academic evidence. And for a 1-point increase in happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, that typically leads to about a 12% increase in productivity. They also did some very interesting research where they analysed data from the world's largest survey of employee well-being. And they created an imaginary stock tracker of the top 100 companies with the highest work well-being scores. And that stock tracker outperformed the traditional stock trackers, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, in both the bull market, where the market went up, the bear market, where the stock market went down. And last year, 2023, the stock market was quite volatile. That portfolio of happy companies to work at outperformed by about 20%. So yes, if you're a CFO, you will get a return on investment if you can improve employee well-being.
I think you need to invest in creating a culture, which means creating leaders who understand the importance of empathy, who understand the importance of creating teams who have got each other's backs.
Hi, I'm Kevin Heinzelman, Workhuman's head of product. We've known for a long time that employee recognition done right impacts metrics like psychological safety, inclusion, and retention, all metrics that affect employee well-being. Now, we're using it to do even more. Here's an example award from John to Kim. The data in a single message in our social recognition platform is incredibly dense. We can analyze wording and make connections to relationships, engagement, sentiment, even bias. Multiply that across an organization, and you have a huge data pool. But how do you access it? At Workhuman, we're able to use that information to train our AI assistant to quickly and easily get insights into things like hidden top performers, flight risks, and people whose skills may be underutilized. That way, fewer employees are overlooked and more employees see a career path forward with your company. It's honest, authentic information combined into a single platform. At Workhuman, we know that what's good for employees is good for companies, and we look forward to helping our customers do both.
I want to lift the lid a little bit more on the dark side of this, because having been, working for a purpose-led organization and all that kind of thing, I think there is a little bit of a tyranny. Purpose was really a useful device to blur the boundary between work and the rest of your life. Because after all, you're supposed to be completely authentic, you bring your whole self to work, and basically work is your purpose. You're there to work and you're there to perform and you're there to deliver and to improve the performance of the company. But isn't that a squeezing of discretionary effort? And what's different about well-being? Is there a difference? Is this just another device to squeeze employees to make them more productive? And okay, so we're going to do nice things for them, but do they have some kind of a requirement to be well, requirement to be wired up to these systems of measurement and deliver the right results for the company? I mean, what do you think about that? Because to me, that's a real danger. And I want to hear how you can avoid that side of things. I see Max smiling, so I'm going to start with you.
I like the cynical perspective. It's a good place to start. No, it's always good to have that challenge. I think that was for sure the old way, right? If we provide you with a gym membership and if we provide you with fruit bowls and bean bags, that you'll stay longer at work. I do think well-being has a different angle, and it should. Because if you're creating that place to work where people wake up on a Monday morning and look forward to going to work, a big part of that is also about creating psychological safety for your people. If you can, and I think in terms of what to invest in, I think you need to invest in creating a culture, which means creating leaders who understand the importance of empathy, who understand the importance of creating teams who have got each other's backs, so that you might not need to seek professional help first, but you might have a team that are there to support you and that you can share the stories in that team, and they've got you, and you've got them.
But what you're describing there is a kind of culture. It's like a positive culture in the organization which allows people to feel open, they're supported, they thrive, they commit, they deliver good results. But the CFO is no longer an obstacle. So where are the obstacles in an organization to creating this sense of well-being?
What we are hearing from our clients and from the market more broadly is that every company is getting squeezed right now. Everyone's CFOs, everyone's procurement teams are all looking for budget to take out, to save, and they're really struggling with how do we introduce new programs. And, a couple of the things from our perspective, first off, we've talked a lot about today about recognition, and recognition continues to be, on a global scale, one of the most effective, efficient, and cost-effective ways to drive towards employee well-being. And one of the things that our team is really great at is working with teams who are interested in implementing recognition and working with them to try to understand what's going on within their organization and where there might be pockets of budget that are actually being spent today on a variety of different things, but aren't necessarily driving true ROI. And so are there opportunities to go in and say, well, you're spending a little bit here, you're spending a little bit here, and you're not getting anything out of it. Let's put that into a strategic recognition program. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean that there's additional budget, coming out of the bottom line.
So we've talked a bit about what it is, we talked a bit about why you might want to do it, but Sarah C., would you like to lead us a little bit towards the how? How do you get this thing to work?
Sure, absolutely. And again, the emphasis with how is how to actually improve employee well-being. And that's the key to overcoming, the cynicism as well. Your employee well-being will not improve if you're working crazy hours and responding to emails at 1 a.m. So I guess I would step back. There's 3 key factors that I recommend on the how. And the first one is to take a holistic approach. And Max, you made the point about these individual level interventions, wellness apps, fruit bowls, relaxation-based classes. Those are all individual level. They're all aimed at the worker. They're not aimed at improving the workplace. So the UK's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence recommends that companies take an organizational level approach as the foundation for good employee mental well-being. And only then, only when you've addressed those structural organizational level challenges, do you layer on top individual level and targeted interventions. So how do you take a holistic approach? Well, to take a holistic approach, you need to roll out organizational level, group level, and individual level interventions. Which interventions? Which brings me to my second point, which is to measure not only how employees are feeling, and I've already explained how to do that, but also why they're feeling that way. There are so many drivers of our well-being at work, and I think they fit really well with those pillars that you've discussed, Sarah. So our manager, whether we feel a sense of inclusion and belonging, whether we feel appreciated, and that really shows up, so the work that Workhuman does is so important, whether we feel energized by our work, whether we have autonomy, manager support, opportunities to learn and grow. I mean, there are so many drivers. We recommend that companies measure all of those drivers, identify your poorest performing drivers, and then target your interventions at those. So for instance, when you ask people, what do you think are the most important drivers? A lot of people might say fair play, fair pay, fair play, fair pay. And it is, of course, important. But actually, when the data is analyzed, it turns out that things like belonging tend to bubble to the top as really important. So my third tip then is to invest in evidence-based interventions. So rather than following what's trendy and rolling out a few bean bags, which frankly, once you're over 40, are not dignified to get up from, follow the evidence, because we do now have evidence.
For me, I know in most of your lives, intervention is either when relationships broken down, right, or when someone in your close friends has got an alcohol problem. I don't know. They're like interventions, and it's big. The importance is to create a place to work where, in particular, the managers and leaders at all levels, to paraphrase a good friend of mine, just be a decent human being. All right? And then how do you create that culture? This is what we sense right at Workhuman. A culture where that's the norm, where a leader or takes their team and creates that sense of belonging within that team, creates that level of psychological safety and trust, and we've got each other's backs. I just don't think we ever teach leaders that.
But Max, could we lift the lid off the manager box? Because what if the person with the inalienable right to be miserable at work is your boss? And, they don't really make you feel good, because people say they leave jobs because of rewards, not paid enough, et cetera, but, the anecdotes are, and I think there's evidence to back it up, that the most common cause of people leaving is
their boss.
Bad manager problem. Would you like to talk a bit about that, Sarah W?
You don't have to invest a ton of money in order to train people how to be good leaders. I think there are so many kind of fundamentals around what strong leadership looks like. And part of it is being open and transparent and the psychological safety element of it. But I think the other elements are maybe even more basic than that. There's the element of just strong communication and how can we empower people to actually drive towards business results. And it sounds so basic, but I think there are a lot of leaders out there who just don't do a strong enough job of this. And every team should just consistently be thinking about how do we communicate, how do we ensure that people feel a good sense of what's happening within the organization and in the empowerment to actually help contribute to it.
Okay.
That kind of combined with then the listening post that you're talking about, whether it's a survey, whether it's other ways of getting feedback from employees to understand where they need more and where there are opportunities to do better.
And if I may nail you on the question a bit more, if you're putting up with managers in your business that are like that, you are making an intentional decision to have a culture like that.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear.
So either course correct them or don't let them be managers anymore.
And my challenge to you also is, as an HR community, are we too reliant upon bad management? Because bad managers need HR, and HR needs bad managers. So I think we do have to constantly challenge ourselves that we're not just being therapists and not just being remedial, that we do actually need managers who can be human at work.
I think if you set a culture where it is explicitly clear that to be a leader, manager, whatever you want to call it, in this organization, here are our expectations of you. Mm-hmm. Right? And actually, yours is not just to manage the detail or the processes. I would say your number one job is to create a cohesive, effective, and resilient team. Because if you can do that, the team can achieve anything together. Right? And if you make that explicit, this is what we expect of our managers and leaders. It has to be role models from the top. Mm-hmm. But if you can make that explicit, then there's nowhere to hide. Because how many of the managers in your organizations have in their KPIs, in their performance management, to create a cohesive, resilient, effective team? I would ask for hands, but I don't think we would find many. And we just don't make it explicit enough.
I used to work for MasterCard, and the former CEO coined the term DQ. So we all know what IQ is, intellectual quotient. We all know what EQ is, emotional quotient. DQ is your decency quotient. And this got discussed during the performance review process. This needs to be core, because if somebody's in sales and they're only judged on how well they're selling, not on how well they're treating other people, you've got a problem.
But we mustn't let also performance delivery be the enemy of good management. Because in my experience, a lot of this toleration for bad behavior is for people who deliver results.
Yeah. Which is why.
And that's something we really need to be conscious of, because that's not a good excuse. But if people believe that's okay, as long as they're getting results, they can behave how they want. That's not necessarily good. Now, I'm not going to allow you to talk about that, because I really want to get onto this best advice that you would offer to the audience to take away. So could we start with you, Sarah?
Sure. Don't just look at the data. Take the insights from the data and then go and meet your teams and hear from them. Hold up the mirror, show them the data, ask them for their thoughts. In my Prior to my current role in the World Wellbeing Movement, I was site lead in MasterCard's Dublin operation. And when we got our employee engagement results, I used to host listening lunches. We were not a free food company, so people still rocked up if you offered them a free lunch. And I would just start very casual with, tell me why you're here. What are you enjoying about being here? And I wanted it to be casual. And then we would move to, so what's annoying you? What's irritating you now, but if it gets worse, 6 months, a year down the line, it could be enough to push you out. And only then will I start presenting, here's what we're seeing in the employee engagement results, what do you think? So the short answer, listen. Because you can only figure out what needs to improve if you're keeping your ears open and listening to your employee's voice.
Very good, thank you very much. Max?
I'll pick up on that actually as well about listening. I think it was from one of your podcasts. She does a great podcast show, so called
the Working on Wellbeing podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
And she interviewed Amy Edmondson. I'm sure many of you are aware of that name, around psychological safety. And there was a great quote which was, a leader's job is not to have all the answers. A leader's job is to ask the right questions. So coming back to listening and then showing that vulnerability as well. I think you've already seen what vulnerability does to change the conversation and then to let other people open up. So if I were to ask what annoys you about work, I might actually be the first one to say, here's what annoys me. Or here's what I've done wrong. But if we come back to creating cohesive, effective and resilient teams, maybe I'll give you a very specific tip. So you can maybe take away to your teams. Because if we can have 400 or 500 leaders, of which I'm sure most of you are, go away and start that, we can have a butterfly effect that could change the world. So in the right environment, so maybe when you've got your team off-site, instead of death by PowerPoint, create togethership by intentionally building that space you've got. Intentionally design the time to help people connect and build that vulnerability-based trust and to co-create. Every minute you're talking about PowerPoint is a minute wasted, especially in this hybrid world. When you've got the time together, don't waste it. And then one question that can change the tone a lot, and maybe you can even ask a stranger this question over lunch. What's the one thing you've got on your plate outside of work right now, which is playing on your heart and mind? And then listen. When everyone in the room answers that question, everything changes. So that's a very concrete tip for you to take away. And please come and tell me later if you asked people that question over lunch as well and what it did.
Sarah W., what advice would you give to our wonderful audience?
Yeah, well, you asked us what's the best piece of advice we've received. I actually wanted to talk about one of the worst pieces of advice that I've received. The advice that I received a long time ago, which you probably got a little bit of a sense of this about me today, is that I share too much. I was told that I am too vulnerable, that I share too much, and that I needed to kind of rein it in. And I joke about this, and I've actually shared this with my team at Workhuman. I've shared it with people throughout my life. And everyone else who I've ever talked to has said, oh my God, I love that about you. And you being that way makes me feel I can share more and makes me feel I can be vulnerable and I can be truthful and I can be the best version of myself. And that just makes life and work so much more fun than having to show up at the office every day feeling like you have to put a new cloak on and you have to be a new version of yourself, or you have to be the version of leadership that's defined by somebody else. And I think that that is what ultimately drives towards well-being, is feeling that sense of confidence in yourself, your ability to be yourself, your ability to bring your whole self to work. And that's where innovation comes, that's where creativity comes, and then that enables you to empower your own team to think and feel and act the same way.
Yeah, that's a lovely piece of advice. And I think there's a theme here, which is lead by example. You know, if you can be a beacon of this for other people, that really helps a lot. But with that having been said, I'd like you to give a very big thank you to the wonderful panel. Thank you very much.
When you turn your radar on to start to want to recognize performance and see the good in things and start to write it down, it actually changes your perspective of the things that are going on.
Tell me a little bit about what industry you are in.
Advertising. Christian education nonprofit industry.
So I've been a firefighter for 35 years.
I'm a hospital pharmacist for 33 years.
I work for a wine and spirits education trust.
Yes, I'm in the legal industry.
Yeah, I work in the renewable energy space.
I'm a nurse anesthetist. I work in healthcare.
Have you ever been in a situation where, through work, you felt like there's been a negative impact on your well-being or mental health?
Yeah, my first job, I was an admin, just like front desk, low end of the totem pole. Was very happy to do it, but just the way I was treated and just the environment of the workplace, I left, I think, within 8 months.
Yes.
I would say definitely yes. And especially in my world, we got an increased amount of people committing suicide because of PTSD.
I would say during COVID in the healthcare industry, an incredible amount of stress trying to keep patients alive in the hospital.
If you think you're just going to churn through people because there's always another one, that's not how you build a company.
There was a lot of appreciation shown from the community, not so much the hospitals and those things themselves. The community would kind of show their support.
Companies have to meet requirements for helping to ensure the physical health and safety of employees. Do you think there should be that same sort of requirement for mental health?
So I think companies should aspire to do that. Require to it, how are you going to legislate that?
I think as a whole in the world, companies definitely should be monitoring how their employees are feeling and their mental well-being, and make sure that they're giving them the things they would need.
We all struggle with mental health at some point in our lives, so I think it's made it okay, and I think it should be supported in the workplace.
Because I think when push comes to shove, it is ultimately you sourcing it out yourself. And there's only a few people I think you can trust at your work to be able to support you before it becomes a negative thing about your employment. Is it impacting your work, etc.
For companies to do that, start implementing policies and programs that support employee mental health and well-being, do you think that's more like a morality, or do you think it makes more sense just as a business? It's good business to make sure your employees are mentally healthy.
Well, a happier employee is a more productive employee.
It's a moral issue to provide that for your employees, but also it shows them that you care. And if they show the employees that they care, then the employees are going to do a better job.
Well, they talk about it. We're politically correct in all our employment laws, aren't we? But in practicality, it sounds awful, but I wouldn't trust work to release all my emotional and mental state fully. I think depending what kind of job you're in and who your employers are, it depends how far you can trust them. Currently, the employers I have, I would trust them, but only so far.
I think both. I think if and there's a moral imperative to help people when they need help, but also it's good business. If you have happy, adjusted employees, they're going to do better work, and then you're going to have happy clients. So yeah, it's important.
Have you ever worked in an environment that had a positive impact on your well-being?
In our job, they do understand that. Yeah. They try their best to be understanding and always help you if you need time off or whatever, personal reasons. So yeah, I don't think I've ever worked in a place where it wasn't like this, to be fair. Yeah. But I've heard stories, so I know it's possible, and that's really scary, so yeah.
So I found that environments that encourage a little time off in the middle of the day to reset, to gather your mental resources so that you can continue on with the day, is very important. I think that they'll find that over time, the productivity, the accomplishments of their employees is far greater than if they simply are trying to squeeze an extra billable hour out of an attorney or a staff member.
I had a baby last year, and so it was a tough transition from working, having a baby, and then post having the baby and still working. They were really kind and gracious and supported me through the whole process. And so because of that, it made me want to stay, work hard. I felt safe and valued. And so because they did care about my mental well-being, I stayed, and I will stay.
Ed, I am so glad to be talking to you here today. We're in Texas, and it's hot, but I'm still glad to see you.
And we have some great things to talk about today.
We have some wonderful things to talk about. You know, this is a topic, well-being, that is really near and dear to my heart as a workplace researcher and activist. I really got into this work because I care about how people experience life, and work is such a huge part of that. You know, it's how people provide for themselves and their families, and it affects how you feel about yourself, how you feel overall, how you exist in the world. So how did you get into this type of work?
So in the work that we do at Gallup, we have a mission of trying to figure out whether or not everybody has a great job and a great life. It's a pretty bold and audacious thing to say, you know, how is the world doing every year on that? And when we look at the data, you look at the global workplace, and 23% of employees come to work engaged in their jobs, and 34% are thriving in their lives. So if you look at that, we've got a lot of work to do on both how to create that energy in your career part of your well-being, but also in your life outside of work around well-being.
Those are not great numbers at all.
No.
Now, people love to talk about generations nowadays, and particularly the younger generation. So anything compelling in, you know, the current data where wellness and the younger generation is concerned?
Yeah, we're the data, the way we cut the data in this workplace report was we looked at 35 and under and 35 and over. And one of the really stunning differences is that loneliness is much higher with people under 35 years old, about 22% versus 19% of people over 35. And we can speculate that some of that has to do with the changing dynamics of the way the workplace is, people working remote and hybrid and things of that nature, which the data kind of indicates. So we're finding that younger generations are having a challenging time finding that career and personal well-being harmonization as they move into the workplace and start to create their futures in life.
So what can organizations do about this type of stuff where their employees are concerned?
Yeah, and I wanted to start with a little bit of a conversation that I've been having with CHROs and chief people officers in my role. And it's interesting when you bring the subject of well-being up, almost to a person, their first reaction is they talk about the programs that are in place. Yes, we have well-being programming. Yes, we have, weight loss if that's what you're interested in. We have exercise facilities, physical well-being. We have our 401ks or other savings vehicles and things like that. And in fact, it was interesting because a lot of times they get a little bit defensive about it first out of the gate.
Interesting.
And I think one of the challenges is that people are seeing this as being a program's standpoint. And I don't think it's the total rewards packages that are the problem. I think it's the utilization of those programs that are the problem. And so how do you get people to not just be aware that there is an EAP program if you need some help, but also to be encouraged to make that call and to take the time to have that conversation? Or, if you want to exercise during the day, is there a stigma around that going out? You couldn't do that today in Texas, but if you wanted to go out for a walk or a run, you could go do that, and people wouldn't go, well, why is this person not working during the day? So we have to remove some of the stigmas around this. We have to prioritize it as part of the way work gets done, and we have to celebrate when people are actually taking advantage of the programs, some small, some big, around that.
Can you talk a little bit about your research around, people feeling like their organization cares about their well-being? Like, what does that look like? What has that been historically? And then when people feel like their organization does care, what kinds of things happen as a result?
Yeah, and so it's such a great question. I mean, there are hundreds of questions you can ask about well-being and all of the elements of well-being and the behaviors associated with it. But we tried to find a single item that you could ask in any simple survey that you're doing to get a read on that. So it is, does my organization care about our well-being? And I'm going to tell you two things. One is the number is bad. It's in the 20s around people who strongly agree with that. And the worst thing is since the pandemic, it has more or less, to be a little dramatic, collapsed. So it was in the 40s during 21 and 22, and now it's down into the 20s. And so...
Wait a minute, that's half.
Yes, I know,
okay,
collapsed is the word I tried to use to make sure that we were
So you were not being dramatic,
no.
It did collapse. Okay, good to know.
So, but what happens there is that once when those people strongly agree that the organization cares about their well-being, their engagement, they're almost 6 times more likely to be engaged. They're almost half of them are suffering from burnout. Very few of them, like 1 in 4, are actually looking for or seeking new jobs, and almost 8 in 10 of them are willing to recommend the organization as a great place for others to work. So getting this right actually puts the fuel that you need to be energized at work through engagement, and also the other sort of social things that you're looking for around people who want to be part of the team, tell others to be part of the team, and are less burned out, say on Sunday night. They're not worried about coming into the office on Monday and getting back to the things that they love to do.
We've talked about the role of the manager, but what have you seen from an organizational perspective in terms of things that an organization can do to really drive wellness forward and make a significant impact for their employees in this area?
Yeah, and again, we asked CHROs questions about this, and we had some really interesting insight from it. So basically, the CHROs were saying that the HR team was taking on about 80% of the communication and the nudging in order to get these programs happening, and a very small percentage, like in the 40%, leaders and managers. So we have to transition that from an HR initiative to a management initiative, and getting that embedded into the work and into the day-to-day kind of feel of how we're working together. Because one of the things that I speak about when I talk to leaders is, if you had an asset, like if you took employee engagement, and people always say, our people are our greatest asset, right?
No,
they write it in their annual reports and stuff like that. So when I was with a group of CFOs, I said, if you had an asset that was running at 23% efficiency, which the global engagement number would say that's what they are, what would you do with an asset that was running at 23% efficiency, Michan?
What did they say?
Well, they said, well, we would either fix it, or get a new one, or things like that.
They would survey it once a year.
We wouldn't survey it. We would invest, particularly if it was a really important asset, you would be there tomorrow trying to figure out how to make it work twice as well, 3 times as well, 4 times as well. And that's the same kind of energy that we need in organizations around well-being and engagement, because those two are completely connected.
Yes.
And they're both correlated and causal. And so if you can actually get those things to work in harmony, you will get the productivity that you need from the teams in order to invent the things that you're trying to create for your companies.
What I want to pivot to is the research that we do together. Gallup and Workhuman, we've been working together for a wonderful 3 years. Yes. So let's pivot to talking a little bit about that. What we find in our research is that recognition helps people feel like they're part of the community, right? Their coworkers become not just coworkers, but it becomes a community. We find that people who are recognized are more likely to say they're connected to their culture, they're more connected to their colleagues. I think also the interesting thing that we find consistently that people don't often think about is the relationship between recognition done well and stress and burnout. So when you're thinking about stress and burnout, there's the objective part of what's going on, but then there's how you feel about it. And what our research says is that recognition kind of interrupts that relationship in the best way possible. We consistently find that people who are recognized are less stressed and less burned out. There's something about it that reinforces to people, times may be tough, but you're hanging in, you're doing okay, you're still a valued member of this community. And so I think people don't understand that or know that enough for my purposes, but also just don't understand how well strategic recognition and well-being go together when thinking about things like engagement, productivity, willingness to stay with an organization, as an example.
Recognition overall is going down, not just recognition around the 3 that you taught me about. One is for the great work that people do, which we should be recognizing for.
That's right.
The second one is about life of work anniversaries and other work events, promotions, things like that. And then the third one is life events. And I really believe that when you've got a robust program that's doing all 3 of those, you're actually celebrating the person, the work that person is doing and contributing to the greater good, and how that person is connected to the culture through each one of the 3. And then
I
of
can't
course,
stop smiling.
and then of course you get back to leaders, right? So
Yeah.
leaders only have a certain amount of time and energy that they can give to the entirety of the organization. And I believe that the things that you celebrate, whether or not you celebrate them through a recognition program or a note to someone or an all hands meeting where you're getting the things that you celebrate, that the investments you make in greatness, like people breaking down barriers or people running a marathon or people doing things that were really important to them, that's where you as a leader can shine about how you see your greatest asset, which is the people in your organization, playing a role in both the current state and the future state of your organization. Okay, Michan, I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
I wanted to start with the linkages that you're seeing between how recognition, performance, and well-being come together through some of the client work that you're doing.
Yeah, so we consistently find that recognition is related to higher psychological safety, lower stress, lower burnout. And we have some clients that are really linking these two together. So for example, we have one client that, gives recognition for badges that people gain from doing activities related to well-being, right? And so you're allowing people to track, you're recognizing their accomplishments, you're celebrating their accomplishments. And what we find for that client is that people that have been recognized for getting a badge, for doing all of these different, wellness activities, they actually have lower turnover compared to people who did not get a badge and were recognized for that. So we're definitely, finding some relationships, and we have clients that are doing really, really cool things around linking the two as well.
And I know when you and I get together, we talk an awful lot about leaders' responsibilities.
Yes.
We also talk about managers' responsibilities. But I thought it would be interesting to get your take on a robust culture of recognition is really a person-to-person strategy, a manager to team.
That's right.
It's integrated sort of in the oxygen of the organization. Can you give us some observations on how you're seeing that work and what ignites that in order to be part of the real ethos of who you are?
So the old way of thinking about this was, it's manager to direct report, giving recognition and appreciation. And what our research says is that even though that is good, it's not enough, right? Because just from a practical perspective, in a lot of these roles, you're working side by side with people and doing things that are important for the organization that your manager may never see, right? You're supporting your coworkers emotionally, or you're doing things to help them out. And as a practical perspective, when an individual sends a recognition moment to a coworker, it allows the leader to see it, right? Because the leader is approving it. So now that thing that could have been invisible is now visible, not only to your coworker, but also to your manager and to the rest of the organization, because it shows up on a social feed. Now, this social part is important. We know that from our research together, right? We call that being embedded in the culture. And what we consistently see is that when recognition is embedded in a culture, all of these things that we see as results, like, stress, burnout being lowered, engagement being higher, they are amplified when people feel like recognition is embedded in the culture.
Yep. Some of the best advice I ever got in my career from a manager of mine was, if you want to get more recognition, you should give more recognition. And also that when you're a little bit down, because we all have ebbs and flows in our jobs, but when you turn your radar on to start to want to recognize performance and see the good in things and start to write it down, it actually changes your perspective of the things that are going on.
So before we wrap, do you have any parting words of advice for leaders, for HR, and for organizations to drive strategic well-being forward?
So I think the best way to describe this is that if we can move engagement and well-being conversations from the nice to do to the have to do, because once you get that right, the other have-to-dos in your organization around patient care or guest care or growth, those will take care of themselves if you take care of the people who are responsible for going and doing that. So that would be my big message to everybody in closing.
I love that. If you take care of the people will take care of you, and the business will thrive. If I had one piece of advice, it's to keep going in that direction. As we think about well-being, let's think about the whole human, because again, as you said, if you take care of the human will take care of you, and the business will thrive, and everything else gets easier. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Ed. I always have the best time talking to you, and I could literally talk to you all day.
Let's do this again soon.
Sounds great.
Before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first is to learn more about Workhuman's social recognition platform and how it can help drive well-being at your organisation by fostering a culture of connection and belonging. The second is to join us for Workhuman Live next May in Denver, Colorado. If you enjoyed the conversation today, you'll love Workhuman Live. Every year we gather the best speakers in the world and have thought-provoking breakouts and some one-of-a-kind experiences. I sometimes call it the Woodstock of HR. It's also Workhuman Live's 10-year anniversary, so we're pulling out all the stops. We'll be following up with an email where you can learn more, so keep an eye out. Most importantly though, your attendance is a testament to the importance you place in finding more human ways of working, and we're honoured for the time you've spent with us on this episode and all season long. As we're a company grounded in the power of recognition, I can't think of a better way to end this season by recognising you. Thank you. That's it for this episode. Be sure to tune in 2025, and until then, make work human.